A look back at 10 terrible industrial disasters in history. Citizens in all countries of the world are exposed to potential risks from industrial incidents and industrial wastes. 1. Minamata disaster. Japan, 1956. Minamata is the name of a poetic, beautiful city in Kumamoto Prefecture, Japan. But Minamata is also the name of a disease that has caused terror to many Japanese. In 1956 and 1968, people with the disease were discovered in Minamata with paralyzed or trembling limbs, deaf ears, blurred vision, slurred speech, screams of pain, and experiencing contractions. 106 citizens of Minamata died over the course of a decade, and many more victims became blind, deaf, or insane. Some people suffer from neurological disorders such as tremors in the limbs, loss of sensation, loss of balance, loss of coordination of movements, and limited eye vision. If the mother is poisoned during pregnancy, the development of the fetus's brain is affected and the infant may suffer from conditions such as cerebral palsy, deafness, blindness, or a small head. It was not until 1968 that the Japanese government officially declared this disease was caused by Chiso Company because it had polluted the environment. The chemical plants of this company have released excessive amounts of toxic organic mercury, causing fish poisoning. When eating fish, organic mercury enters the human body. They will attack the central nervous system, causing a disease that doctors call Minamata disease. The Japanese aid organization said that so far, nearly 13,000 people have been infected with Minamata disease, and more than 2,000 people have died. In 1965, Minamata disease also broke out along the Agano River in Niigata Prefecture. Because the Showa Denko Company released mercury into the riverbed, in addition to Minamata disease, Japanese economic environmental researchers did not hesitate to release a list of diseases and poisoning cases such as Itai disease in Toyama Prefecture, cadmium poisoning, and copper poisoning. Because factories discharge hazardous waste into the environment during decades of industrial development, 40 years have passed and Minamata Bay is no longer contaminated with methyl mercury. Factories that dump mercury into the sea have been closed for a long time, and the bottom of the bay containing MHG has also been emptied. But the painful lesson of Minamata Bay remains as the best example of how economic development leads to environmental harm to humans. As of April 30, 1997, the number of people in Kumamoto and Kagoshima prefectures certified as having Minamata disease reached 17,000. 2. Bhopal disaster, India. 1984. The disaster occurred at about 10 p.m. on 3 February 1984 in the center of Bhopal city with about 900,000 inhabitants, Madhya Pradesh state, India, and became the largest industrial accident disaster in history. About 40,000 tons of methyisocyanate, mic, an intermediate used in the production of pesticides, leaked from 2 storage vaults from a plant protection complex. This is a dangerous chemical, slightly lighter than water, but twice heavier than air. Therefore, when released into the air, the cloud will exist near the ground. The leak lasted nearly 2 hours, starting at 2200 on March 2, 1984. Due to the phenomenon of heat inversion, the mic gas after the leak cannot escape and this gas cloud covers an area of about 8 square kilometers around the plant. This toxic gas cloud is so dense that people can barely see it. These gases cause irritating coughing, choking, stinging, burning eyes. Toxic gas burns the victim's eye and lung tissues. Attacks the central nervous system, making people lose their self-control. The leak happened at night, when most people were asleep, so the number of victims was very large. 2,000 people died the morning after the disaster, and within a month of the incident, an additional 1,500 people died. 300,000 people were hospitalized because of mic gas. After the disaster, survivors were severely affected, such as cancer, birth defects, etc. 50,000 people could not return to work due to injuries, many could not even go again. In 1989, the Plant Protection Chemical Production Consortium agreed to pay $470 million to compensate for the damage caused by mic gas. However, victims were not allowed to participate in their settlement negotiations. Many frustrated people feel cheated when they receive only $300 to $500 in compensation, or the equivalent of 5 years of medical treatment. 3. Explosion at the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl, former Soviet Union, 1986. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred at around 1 p.m. on April 26, 1986. When the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union, exploded. This is considered the worst nuclear accident in the history of nuclear energy. Due to the lack of walls, the cloud of radioactive fallout from the plant spread across the Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, Great Britain, and the eastern United States. Large areas of Ukraine, Belarus and Russia are severely polluted. About 60% of the radioactive cloud fell on Belarus, according to a 2006 report by Torch. Half of the radiation fell outside the 3 Soviet republics. This disaster emitted 400 times more radiation than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. As a result, 203 people were hospitalized immediately, of which 31 died. 28 of these were due to acute radiation poisoning. Most of them are firefighters and rescuers trying to control the accident. They do not understand the danger of radiation exposure. 135,000 people were evacuated from the area, including 50,000 from the neighboring town of Pripyat. The disaster resulted in the evacuation and resettlement of more than 336,000 people. A 2005 report stated that 56 people died at the time of the incident. An estimated 9,000 people, out of nearly 6.6 million, will die from cancer. 4. Ash spill incident at Kingston coal-fired power plant. The ash spill at the Kingston coal-fired power plant belonging to the Tennessee Valley Authority, USA, occurred on December 22, 2008. Power plant ash is described as non-hazardous waste, but it was detected in the plant's waste contains dangerous metals such as lead and arsenic. Areas filled with peat are now no longer suitable for life. 5. Oil disaster in Kuwait in 1991. During the Gulf War in 1991, when the Iraqi army withdrew from Kuwait, they opened all the valves of the oil well and broke the oil pipelines to prevent the advance of the U.S. military. As a result, the largest amount of oil in history covered the Persian Gulf. It is estimated that the oil spill is equivalent to 240–336 million gallons of crude oil. The oil slick is about the size of the island of Hawaii. An alliance was formed to prevent and isolate this terrible oil spill disaster. They tried to limit the spread by closing broken oil pipelines with smart bombs. However, any recovery efforts had to wait for the war to end. To protect the water from contamination, they had to mobilize about 40 kilometers of floating oil suction rods and 21 oil separators from the water. Along with a series of sump trucks, they collected 58.8 million gallons of oil. According to the International Oceanographic Conference, the world's largest oil spill has had permanent consequences on coral and fish ecosystems. The survey also showed that half of the oil had evaporated, only 1/8 was recovered, and another quarter washed up on land. 6. Industrial waste disaster at Love Canal. Love Canal is a densely populated area with hundreds of homes and schools near Niagara Falls, north of New York. Nothing would have happened here if it weren't for the site that once buried 21,000 tons of toxic industrial waste by a local company in the 40s and 50s of the 20th century. After nearly 30 years of being buried, these toxic wastes began to appear again when toxic gas bubbles floated on the yards and cellars of homes. By 1978, the inevitable result was that a series of families here simultaneously sold their homes to the federal government and evacuated the dangerous area. This disaster led the U.S. government to establish a program called Superfund in 1980 to carry out the cleanup and reconstruction of the area. 7. Exxon Valdez oil spill disaster. On March 24, 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez, piloted by Captain Joseph Hazelwood, crashed into a reef in Prince William Strait, Gulf of Alaska. Within 5 hours, more than 40 million liters of oil were spilled into the sea. This was considered the largest environmental disaster in American history at the time. The oil spill caused damage over 1,300 miles of coastline. By August of the same year, oil had spread over 10,000 square miles in the Gulf of Alaska. The oil spill affected the habitat of many species and killed hundreds of thousands of seabirds, otters, sea lions, seagulls, seals, and countless fish. It also damages commercial fishermen and residents living in the affected area. Transportation company Exxon had to spend more than $2.1 billion to overcome environmental consequences. And after many appeals, had to spend a total of $1 billion for the federal government and the state of Alaska. In addition, there must be compensation to the parties involved. The court also fined Exxon $5 billion for unused value damages. 21 years later, Exxon has yet to pay its full compensation. 8,000 fishermen died while waiting to receive compensation. 8. JCO nuclear plant explosion disaster, Japan. On September 30, 1999, an accident occurred at the JCO nuclear fuel production plant, a branch of Sumitomo Metals and Mining Corporation in Tokamura, Ibaraki, Japan, which exposed 63 people to direct radiation or indirectly, of which 2 died just a few months later. In reality, Tokamura is just a fuel production facility, not a nuclear power plant. The accident happened when 3 plant employees poured a solution of uranyl nitrate into a precipitate. Because the tank contained up to 16.6 kilograms of uranium, more than the expired amount, causing the chain reaction to be started immediately afterwards. Theoretically, this incident is not really dangerous if intervened in time. But because the plant does not have a chain reaction extinguishing system, the chain reaction is maintained for a long time. For several days in a row. The exhaust fan system blew radioactive air from the plant into the vicinity. 9. Dioxin cloud disaster in Seveso, Italy. On July 10, 1976, there was a big explosion at a chemical plant in Seveso, northern Italy. The explosion had engulfed the entire town in thick white dioxin clouds. The dioxin clouds first affect animals, ranging from domestic animals to dead livestock and poultry. After 4 days, people began to feel the bad effects of these clouds, starting with symptoms such as nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, especially for children. Toxic clouds also give rise to a skin ulcer syndrome called chloracne, causing rosacea caused by exposure to chlorine. After that, people were urgently evacuated from Seveso. The authorities intervened and carried out the environmental disinfection as well as cleaning up the area. An estimated 30 kilograms of dioxin was released into the environment, and for the next 20 years, its harmful effects have not been completely treated. Today, when one comes to Seveso, one will find a large park in which there are two giant tanks containing the remains of hundreds of animals that have died from the disaster, part of the factories destroyed. And the soil has suffered the greatest dose of dioxins. 10. 3 Mile Island Incident, Pennsylvania, USA, on March 28, 1979. The first serious incident in the history of the U.S. atomic energy industry occurred at Unit 2 of the 3 Mile Island atomic power plant in Pennsylvania, USA. The incident stemmed from the cooling water flowing out of the No. 2 nuclear reactor, causing the furnace barrel to melt, causing radioactive substances to seep into the ground. It is considered one of the deadliest civilian nuclear accidents in the United States and is rated at 5 out of 8 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, INES, used to report the severity of nuclear incidents. Immediately after the incident, an emergency order to evacuate people within a radius of 9 kilometers around the factory was issued. Fortunately, corrective actions were taken quickly and promptly, thus preventing radioactive substances from escaping into the environment, without affecting human health. Currently, human life is being driven by strong scientific and technological advances. And with environmental incidents that have happened in history as above, the development of science and technology always has great potential for human life. Therefore, it is hoped that when inventing and researching new technologies, researchers and scientists always focus on safety for human health and the environment so that science and technology really bring good values and benefits to human civilization.